everyone. Mike Vogel here for WashingtonCaps.com, bringing you another edition of Break the Ice, joined by Caps Assistant General Manager Ross Mahoney and Draft Guru, I should ask. This is one of our favorite episodes every year, and it's the only one that we ever repeat. It's an annual episode, Monday morning quarterbacking, or in this case, Monday afternoon quarterbacking the 2025 NHL Draft, and going over the Caps 5 prospect haul from this draft, player by player, and we'll talk about some other elements here. It's that time of year where there's a lot of hot stove hockey talk, so we'll jump right into it. Caps started the 2025 draft. They had 27th overall pick in the first round and used it to take left wing Lyndon Lakovic from Moose Jaw, the Western Hockey League. And interesting player here, left wing, bit of a power forward frame at 6'4", 190 pounds. But he played on a Moose Jaw team that was the league champion in 23-24 and had a bit of a role, a bit of a lighter role, but had the experience of playing for a championship team. And then this past season, that team kind of got scattered around the middle of the season with trades, as so often happens in Canadian junior hockey. And from that, he was able to latch on to a larger role and a leadership role. So what made him the right guy to take at number 27, and how do you see his next 3, 4, 5 years unfolding?
Yeah, we really liked the size that you were talking about. You know, well over 6'4", 190 pounds, skates well for his size. Can shoot the puck. I think what probably grew on us even more this year when we watched him a little closer, because it was his draft year. You know, in the year before, those players jump out at you, but you don't have them under the microscope. But he can really make plays too. He passes the puck really well, and I think that kind of surprised us a little bit, you know, as the year went on. Ended up being a bit of a tough situation for him. Like you said, he played in Moose Jaw, who went to the Memorial Cup, and we thought he played well there. And then they had a decision to make whether they should blow the team up, or and they did. They traded away their goaltender and probably their captain, Brendan Yager, to Lethbridge. They made other trades and trying to get as many picks and players as they could. And Lyndon actually had a bit of an injury, came back from that, and then he was given the C, became captain of a very young team. And I thought that was good for him too. I think it gave him that responsibility. The year before, as you said, they had a very veteran team, and he probably could just go out and play and didn't have to, worry so much about a leadership role. So he'll be going back to Moose Jaw. I don't want to speak for Moose Jaw, but I could see him being a pretty big chip that they would have to trade to a team that thinks they would have a chance to win the Western Hockey League. The Memorial Cup's being held in Kelowna, ironically his hometown. Yeah. There's some other teams, I think Spokane, Medicine Hat, and some other teams that have a good chance to make a run for it. And it wouldn't surprise me if he was moved, because he will bring back a lot of assets, to Moose Jaw if they do choose to do that. Kind of reminds me of the way it went with Andrew Crystal last year. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same situation.
He's also a late birthday, so this could theoretically, technically be his final season in the Western League.
Yep, he'll be as a 19-year-old. He could play as a 20-year-old, but he's played in the league now for 3 years. So, we've had a tendency to move our 20-year-olds on to pro hockey if we've signed them.
And he's got, in addition to the typical power forward skill set, sounds like you said, his wheels are pretty good, but also sounds like he's got the ability to carry and receive passes and such at full speed, make plays, like you said, in those situations, and with that frame and everything, pretty good at protecting the puck and everything down low. Any areas of his game you'd like to see him elevate between?
Yeah, I think he could use that body even more. Like, as you said, it's really good at puck protection. It's hard to get the puck off him. But I think, being consistent, finishing checks, on the forecheck, I think that's an area that he can work at. In a lot of ways, he reminds me of our older Protoss. Also, they played in PA at the same time. You had this, really tall player that had good hands, that was really smart, that, they just have to learn to be a little more consistent on the forecheck and got those big bodies and make those defensemen be a little more aware when they're on the ice.
And Big Pro, he was kind of still growing into his frame. Do we think Linden still has some?
Yeah, if you meet Linden, you can see that he's still, has room for development as far as putting on weight. So and it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up at the end of the day, or 215, 220. I mean, he's he definitely has the height, but I can see, and he has the frame. So I think the weight will come, in the future.
Interesting. Second round pick, and this is kind of interesting too because the first time the Caps ever had pick number 37 was actually in their very first entry draft way back in 1974. But in those days, it was the first pick in the third round. Here it's an early second round pick. And, one of you guys' for me, signature moves is going back to the room after round one and taking stock of which players were not drafted in round one that you might have expected to go maybe in the latter stages of that first round, and identifying guys that you could maybe trade up to get. But the fact that you had Boston's second round pick in this draft from the Hathaway-Orlov trade, you didn't have to make that deal. You're already sitting there at 37, and you kind of had your eye on this guy, and he got to you there at 37. Everybody really raves about him. He's a kid who's been a captain at pretty much every level, whether it's international play or for his moto team that his dad played for. And I think he's got a younger brother who's probably on that track as well. So it sounds like he's got a really well-rounded 200-foot game. And one of the really impressive things about him is, and you mentioned this post-draft, is that you ask his teammates whether they're international or national team teammates or his moto teammates about him, and they all to a man rave about him.
Yeah, they really do. He just has so much character, and so it's not a surprise, as you said, that he's been the captain of the Swedish national teams in his age group. Like he was again this year at the under-18, and it's. Yeah, a lot of times, you're at the combine and you're asking questions, and it's, who'd you like to play with? Whether it's on your own team or let's say Canada, U.S. and all those Swedish kids said, I'd like to play with Milton, and I get it because he's so unselfish, and he's very smart, and he will get you the puck, and he's also doing the back checking, and he's also winning the face-offs, as you said. He's got such a strong 200-foot game, but. It was amazing. There wasn't a hesitation. It was right away Milton. They would like to play with him. So, yeah, fortunate. I thought to get him. I thought might go a little bit ahead of where we were picking. But I also think maybe sometimes his skill could be a little bit understated.
Yeah.
Because he does all the little things right. He's not one of those guys that I think I've said before where. He's going to toe drag you and walk around and then, deke the goalie and roof under the crossbar. And, but he's the guy that's pulling people over to him and putting this beautiful pass onto somebody who's got a wide open net, or a really good scoring opportunity. So, the Halinka tournament, I think in the 5 games he had 10 points, 2 points a game. That you have to have skill to do that in that tournament. There are players picked before him that had 3 or 4 points or 5 points. Like 2 points is very good. The tournament, I think he might have been third in the scoring in the tournament, and then also the under-18, the championship. Like a big game against Switzerland, but everybody else had a chance to have a big game against Switzerland also.
Yeah, right.
So it's I don't it doesn't matter to me what the opposition is. You're contributing and you're making plays, and your teammates were able to score goals. I think his winger might have got 4 goals that game, but a lot of it was a direct result of the passes and the vision that Milton had, and that other player's ability to finish. So again, I think he was 3rd or 4th in scoring in that tournament. So when we talk about how skilled is he, somehow he ends up in the scoring in all these tournaments. So the skills there. It's just probably a little more subtle, than you see some other players that can, I guess, maybe have more like the highlight type goals.
Also sounds like he's got some pretty good straight line speed, and like you said, just details of his game are pretty impeccable, well rounded. And he was asked, I heard a couple of different times about what do you need to work on. He didn't really he didn't really put anything forward. As I think he sees himself as being pretty strong in all of those areas.
Yeah, I mean, one thing he could do is probably shoot more, be a little more selfish. When you get those guys with a vision like that, I remember when we drafted Nick Backstrom too, and not saying that Milton is Nick Backstrom.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I mean,
he's faster than Nick.
If that happened, that would be unbelievable because Nick was so good for us and such a good person. But I just think that it's sometimes when you have that vision and you're so unselfish that you want to keep the goalie and you want to keep the defenders a little more honest, and you should shoot the puck a little bit more.
But it also sounds like he's got the hockey sense to realize that in a lot of those situations where you're talking about, where he's drawing a couple of defenders, that the guy with the best shot is not him, but rather the teammate that he's going to slip it to.
Yeah,
which is also impressive.
Yeah, no, for sure.
How do you see his progression? I think he did play a few games in the men's league last year. Do you want to see him play for Moto and the men's league before he comes over to play in the American League?
Yeah, I think he's got a real good chance of playing with the men. I think he had a little bit of a taste of it last year, and he was also in the under 20, and then I think that in the under 18. When the under-20s are out, they put him in the under-18 for the playoffs, which he produced again there also, and all those tournaments for the national team. But, yeah, he'll be playing for Moto with the men, which will be good for him. It's to be another good challenge. He's shown that he can, play in the under-20, obviously. So time for him to play against some older players, and we expect him to have a really good year.
And then in the third round, guys are able to trade back there and still get the guy that you want to trade. Drop down from 93 to 96 with a trade with Ottawa. Got I think a 7th rounder for 2027. Just another arrow for the quiver there for the future. But you got Maxime Schaefer from the German league, and he just was absolutely dominant. He kind of destroyed the competition at the junior level over there this year. Gets elevated up to Ice Baron, which was the top team in the men's league, and played a good amount. I think he played most of his games, over 30 games, and obviously he's not going to have a similar role for that team, but it sounds like he held his own. He played in the playoffs for that team, and they were the best team in the league. So the fact that he was able to carve out some a bit of a role there, that's got to bode well for his future. And he sounds like another big kid, at least tall-wise for sure. Might need a little more meat on the bones, but sounds like he plays a fairly net front, physical type of game. How do you see his track going forward?
Yeah, no, that's a really good description. He is a taller player. He's probably close to 6'4". He needs to get stronger for sure. I think his skating will improve a little bit, even more. But really like the way he plays, like his intensity, like his ability to get inside the dots and go to the net. And he gets those tough goals that some kids don't go to those areas to try to score. Played well in the under-18. We thought he had a very good World Junior tournament. Also scored 2 or 3 goals in the World Junior tournament. And again on the under-18 in the World Championship. But we thought he did a good job there. And as you said, he played a lot of games with the men.
Yeah,
which is good. Obviously in a bottom 6 role. So I think that's a good experience for him. And when they're with the men too, you want them to be able to play a certain number of minutes to be able to keep improving. And so I think he'll probably be able to play even a little bit more this year.
When these kids come in this week and you're able to put them in the camp situation, what are you looking for when you, because obviously you've seen this kid play, you got a good handle on what he brings and everything. When you bring the whole pot together here and for this week in July every year, what are you specifically looking for from the crop that you just drafted?
Yeah, it's you're always looking for the effort. Like I look at who we have with our development team with Steve Richmond and Ole Kolzig and Jim Slater, Brooks Orpik, and I look at our strength coaches. I look at our trainers. I look at our medical personnel. We've got our coaches go on the ice. NHL Coach of the Year will be out there with them, and so I look for the kids to come in and really give us the same effort that all those other people are going to give. Because I know our group is going to do everything they possibly can to educate these kids in whatever area it is, whether it's skating or, like I said, strength training. So I'm looking for them to give us that same effort back and to absorb everything that's been taught to them. So it's and certain things you look at, you think they should need to do this or do that, and at the end of the week we'll have a better idea as far as a bit of a personal plan for them from the strength coaches, and I think the development team then starts to chart a path where maybe you need to improve more in this area or that area. So yeah, it's such an educational camp, which is really good.
And how much have you seen, like, from the organization in terms of, like, a lot of the things that you just said have come along in the last 20, 25 years, the fleshing out of the development department, having a strength coach at every level of the organization, the presence of Kenny McCudden as a skills coach for the varsity Washington Capitals, to me, seems to have made a massive difference in the development of Ilya Protas, Brandon Duhaime, Alex Alexeyev, just in the couple of years that Kenny's been here.
Yeah, it's changed so much. At first when we, long time ago, it was more you came in and you scrimmaged all the time and sent them home and brought them back to camp. And now it's like you said, it's almost like, Washington Capitals University. It's really an educational. And I mean, at one time our development team basically was sort of area scouts trying to help out a little bit after a game and give a few hints. And then we hired Steve Richmond full time, and then we expanded that even more. And I think we were one of the first teams to really start doing development, which is, to me, made such a difference. The skills coaches, we didn't have that a long time ago. So camp has changed from being more scrimmage and, skating to an educational, camp. And obviously the strides we've made off the ice with nutrition and strength training it's so much different than 30 years ago.
I think you're giving every one of these kids, regardless of where they're drafted, a much better chance of having success as they progress through the ranks. You guys traded out of the fourth round as part of the deal that brought Declan Chisholm here from Minnesota, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But so you had your fifth round pick, which was Jackson Crowder. I almost said Keith. Jackson Crowder in the fifth round, I think 155 overall. He played in the USHL last year. Big center, another kind of power forward type of frame. And it sounded like his game took off a little bit after a midseason move from Sioux City to Chicago. And I think you said he's maybe committed to Ohio State the season after this one. Seems like maybe the one thing he could stand to improve is his skating a little bit. But how do you see it with?
Our U.S. scouts, A.J. Taves and Jeremy Browning, Rich Alger, they really they kept bringing his name up. And I think they really liked the person, and I think they really liked his style of play. Probably a little more old school. He is the guy that finishes checks. He's the guy that kind of brings that physicality every shift. He's no fear in his game at all. And I think he's got some good skill too. Skating, for sure. I think that can improve. But I mean, he's a young guy. He's going to get stronger. Yep. And we thought that was a really good spot where we got him. But really like his compete. He's a good teammate. He sticks up for his teammates also.
And he's another kid who, we see this over the years too, where he's coming from one of those warm weather areas. He's from Allen, Texas, and I don't know if you guys have ever drafted a Texan. I know we've had at least one Texan who's suited up for the Caps over the years.
Yeah, it's amazing when the NHL moves into a certain area. Mm-hmm. It takes a while, but all of a sudden, and you're a little guy, and mom takes you to an NHL game, and then you want to play hockey, and then we start getting kids from all over the place. Like, it wasn't that long ago where we had nobody from Colorado or Texas or California or Florida. It was all usually, Minnesota, Wisconsin, some of New England, and then maybe a little around Michigan and Illinois.
And Massachusetts.
Yeah, now it's amazing when you look at the rosters when I'm out scouting and where the kids are coming from. And Yeah, I think it's awesome. It just gives us more athletes and better players, which makes our league better and more exciting for the fans.
And that's what makes expansion possible as well, and that just sort of feeds the beast. It brings the game into more markets and makes more kids want to play it. So, yeah, nothing wrong with that at all. And then in moving out of the 4th round in that Chisholm trade, you did move into the 6th round with pick number 180 overall and use that to take the only defenseman of the day, Aaron Dahlqvist from Brynäs over in Sweden. Another kid who played mostly at the junior level, but also saw action in 16 games in the Swedish league. And another really strong, sizable kid at, I think, 6'3", 205. And he sounds like a more of a defensive, really physical kid who could maybe stand to work a little bit on his puck touches and some of his puck handling type things. How do you see him progressing?
Yeah, no, that's a real good description of him. He is big, he is strong, he could skate. You know, he has that ability to close quickly in the neutral zone or in his end on players. He's physical, pretty consistent with finishing those checks. Liked his positional play too. Even though he likes to hit, he doesn't draw himself out of position. He's not one of those guys that stares at the puck the whole time and just tries to, go and hit whoever has the puck. I thought he did a really good job of, as I said, positionally in his own end. When you look at a player like that with his size and physicality and strength, he's, probably going to have a better chance to be in the penalty kill than he would be in the power play in the future.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we need to work, get his hands going, get him confidence with the puck, and I think he makes a pretty good outlet pass, but sometimes you need to do that even quicker, when you're going back for puck retrievals, make sure you know what the situation is when you get the puck, and then turn and head up the ice and move it right away. But and to play games in the with the men as a defenseman is a lot harder to play games, as a forward or a center,
especially at that age.
Yeah, I think that really boded well for him. Yeah, so we're happy. We think that's a really good value where we got him in the draft.
Hoping to see him maybe get a larger chunk of his action with the men's league, or even maybe just play more shifts per game at that level.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think he'll get more games. A year older, he'll be stronger, and the games he does play in, as you said, I think they'll give him more minutes for sure.
How would you characterize the draft this year? I know last year you guys felt like you really nailed it. Like the guys that you wanted were there when you wanted them. You didn't really have to chase too much. How did this year compare to the last couple? Because it seems like you guys, I heard the word heater was tossed around on on the broadcast, which I thought was kind of appropriate. But as we talked about a little bit earlier, you guys have had a good chunk of picks the last 3 drafts prior to this one. I think 22 players taken in the last 3 drafts, and half of those in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, it was interesting in the sense that, and I thought it was going to go this way, but in the first round we were crossing off a lot of names. And I know it may sound funny to people that are listening because, there's over 200 kids get drafted, and you've got 32 teams, and they all in hockey. They're all scouts. You must think everybody's the same, but we're not. When you look at the results. But I just kept stroking names off the list with the marker, going, "Wow, this is." Usually, there's more outliers. Like let's say we have a list of 40, and there'll be some names in 45 or 52 or maybe 38 that are going before we pick. That wasn't happening for a long time.
Right.
And I thought, well, that's kind of unique. It seemed to be the same players, but in a different order, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So that was probably a little bit different this year as far as how many because the year before, getting Protas and Matiko in the 3rd round, and we had them both rated pretty high on our list, but this year was almost like there was this group of players that were going to get drafted probably in the first 2 or 3 rounds, so different that way.
And when you're sitting there stroking those names off, do you think, is your instinct, hey, we may need to move up to get our guy? A lot of times. Yeah,
you start. There's a lot of strategy that goes into it. I mean, it kind of depends sometimes who's picking before you, because we all have tendencies.
Sure, yeah. we go to school on that.
Yeah,
stuff.
We all do. So always try to do our homework on who's picking ahead of us and what type of player they like. So that's always a decision you make because if they like the same. I remember one year, I think Detroit came up to us after and said, "Your first, second, and third round pick. That's who we were taking." But they were picking about 2 spots after us. That would have been with Orlov's year and Cody Eakin and
2009.
So you have to kind of know your opposition. And other times you may have a feel that you can sit tight and you're going to get one of these 2 or 3 players, and you kind of have them in the same layer. And there's not a big difference in who they are, and it could be for various reasons. Like in Linden's case, Lakovic, I think not playing in the playoffs at all probably hurt him.
Sure.
A lot of times scouts get their last view on guys, and some of the players, they played 2 months after he was done. They might have played 2 or 3 rounds in their junior playoffs. They played in the under-18 World Championships, or kids are going to the Memorial Cup. That's 4 rounds plus the Memorial Cup, where he was done 2 months before that. So, not a lot of views, later in the year probably from teams. So maybe that helped him, be where we were when we were picking. So you're trying to, gather as much information as you can, and it's a strategy of it. Like you said, moving up or moving back, and you kind of have the hunt during the year. You're out on a hunt. You're hunting for players, and then you get to the draft, and the strategy of it becomes really, really interesting.
Well, and as I mentioned earlier in the draft, you guys had that sort of tick or tendency to try to move up and grab a player early in the second round that you really like. Cole Hudson last year is a great example, maybe the primary example. We'll see going forward. But I think also what you just said, drafting these kids who maybe played on really poor teams that didn't make the playoffs, and maybe it's a primacy recency thing where the last viewing the scouts had of this kid might have been in March, and then they've been looking at dozens and dozens of other kids playing extra rounds of the playoffs, and those guys get moved to the little bit to the back of the brain, and there's opportunity there. And I think back to guys like Mike Green and Braden Holtby for sure. I think maybe even Eric Fair in that
out of sight, out of mind a little bit, and then
exactly.
Also. We've seen have had luck with that in our drafts, with kids that played on teams that were rebuilding, that were really young, that didn't win a lot of. I think Mike Green's team won 8 games this draft year. So. And I think sometimes and Braden might have been a couple of years later, and they weren't very strong either. The year we drafted him, and especially as a goalie, I think you're cheating a lot of times too, because you got to make those saves and. Yeah. Where Mike Green was playing probably 35 minutes a night, which was too much at that age, but that's what they had. And so he probably made some mistakes that he wouldn't have made if he played 24, 25 minutes a night. So you have to take all of those factors in consideration, and I think we've done a pretty good job with that, kind of getting some real good value on some teams that, like I said, are struggling. Usually it's because of a rebuild. They've made a run for it, and we've seemed to have got, as I said, pretty good value in that. And then you could be playing with younger guys too, and you're not getting the puck. It's hard. It's hard to be in a young team that's rebuilding. So,
well, you and your amateur scouting crew do a great job every year, and once the draft is in the rear view as it is now, you guys now move on to that 2026 crop. But the work that you guys do every year sort of stays, because it gets referred back to these players, who don't get drafted by the Caps, go to other teams in the league, and you never know when the opportunity comes along down the road to maybe acquire one or more of these guys, as did this past week. So I think it was Thursday, Caps make a deal with the Florida Panthers to acquire Justin Sordiff, a kid who was only drafted 5 years ago. He's 23 years old, and a guy who seemed to have his path blocked by a two-time Stanley Cup, being on a two-time Stanley Cup championship team. He's at the end of his entry-level contract. Your pro scouts have seen enough of him now to think that he can play at the NHL level for the Washington Capitals next season. So make the acquisition, sign him to a contract. Let's see what happens. But what were your – and you mentioned it after the fact that you guys saw him going in the second round in that 2020 draft. He was actually taken by Florida in I think probably about the middle of the third round, maybe just a little bit, maybe the second half of the third round. But you're able to get him in here now, and what you guys didn't have a second or a third in that draft. You had Hendrix Lapierre in the first round and didn't have a pick until the fourth round, so you guys didn't really have a chance to grab him. But now Florida has done a pretty good job of developing him. He had a really good year at Charlotte, had a great playoff in the Calder Cup playoff. How does it work when this? And I know that the Caps had this wasn't just something that developed. Chris said you guys have had interest for a while, but how does that input go when they're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, he gets drafted by another team, moves on to pro, and then it becomes your pro staff, Brian Sotheby and the rest of the guys, and they do an unbelievable job. I mean, look at and Chris Patrick, obviously, leading all of this, and look at what we did last year. I mean, people are talking about where the Caps are going to finish and what type of year they're going to have, and we bring in the Duhanes and the Roys and Dubois, and we end up with the second most points in the league. So our pro guys, those guys know what they're doing, and I think Justin sort of has been on their radar for a while. So. As far as, and you have your analytical team, of course, Tim Barnes and HT. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. I guess the role that the amateurs would play is, they're going to ask us about what was he like when he was 17? What was he like in his draft year? And did we want to draft him? Where would we have drafted him? And, what type of person he was? Because, you're doing your interviews, and, the Moose Jaw general manager, he was the head scout when he worked in Vancouver. He was the head scout. He was the guy that drafted, Justin, and so I know him really well. You check with that and get the character reference too. And then the GM in Vancouver, he spoke really highly about him, and I mean, he ended up being the captain of the team. And I don't see a lot of games after the kids turn pro. I'm just too busy doing the amateurs with my group. But I happened to be in Hershey and watched a playoff game, and I thought he might have been the best player on the ice. His speed, he's got skill, he brings it every shift. So when I was asked some questions about what he was like when he was younger, I was like, this is good. I hope this works out, and it did for us. But I mean, you got to credit like I said, the pro staff and Chris, and the analytics. I mean, it's those guys have done such a good job, and like I just said about last year's team and all the acquisitions that we had, and to be successful though, you have to do that. You have to. We had our young Big Michaels and Protosses that took a jump, and then you've got to trade well, and then you've got to sign good free agents. And if you could do all three of those, you're going to always have a very competitive team. I think sometimes teams draft well but don't do well with the trades, or they trade well but don't, do well with the free agents. And I think our group has done a really good job, and a big part of that is communication too. I mean, you stay in your own lane, you don't overlap into things, but when you're asked about it, you give your answer, and the amateur scout, the coach's coach, that's how it should work, and that's what it's like in our organization, and we communicate a lot, and like I said, the pro guys have done such a good job. It's awesome.
And one of you mentioned that what they did last summer, one of the guys they brought in was Taylor Radish on a 1-year deal, and he did a good job of playing on the right side of that line with Duhaime and Dowd. But if that's sort of spot, and it's not hard to sort of project him into that spot, but if that's his spot this year, Spencer Carberry talked about it a number of times during the season, how that putting a new player with Duhaime and Dowd was sort of his go-to move, because those guys play the system so well and they communicate so well. So you would see a guy like Beauvillier or Ethan Frank come up and get time with those guys, Miroshnichenko as well, because they would sort of indoctrinate them a little bit and give them their sea legs in the system. So Now, if you can see sort of maybe holding down that role for the 2 years that Nick is under contract, if he's able to sort of apprentice, you might be able to even move him to the middle. He's still only 25 at that age. And in the meantime, you've got a luxury that you haven't had in maybe 10 years, and that's having two right-handed guys who can take faceoffs on the varsity roster.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, we'll see how training camp goes, and
Sure.
the staff, the coaching staff, and obviously we'll figure that out. I when you're talking about coming in and playing with Duhane and Nick Dowd, I mean you couldn't have two better guys to play with. They work so hard. They finish every check, and I mean we never ever get cheated of a shift by those guys. So you're a new guy, you come in, you're with them, boy, like the train's leaving the station, you better get on board. And I just think it's a lot easier transition probably coming from somewhere else to play with them. I mean, you just go along with them and work as hard as they do, and things will work out for you.
And also, it's organizationally, Chris and Mac have been very upfront about we're trying to get younger, we're trying to get better. Sort of 4 years younger than the guy who played in that slot last year, and a little bit less expensive as well. With the cap going up, allows you guys to do some other things at other areas of the roster. And now Declan Chisholm is a little similar too. He was drafted the same year that Alexeyev was, several rounds later, but his career's further along than Al's is at this point, and you're able to get him in here, sign him. And he, you can look back a little bit and look at, I think it was the off season leading into the pandemic shortened season of the 56 game season of 2021. Caps made a little off the radar move of signing Trevor Van Riemsdyk as a free agent at that time. He was probably a couple of years older than Chisholm is now, but a little bit similar. Kind of signed him to be an extra with the idea of that. In a year, you're probably going to be in our top six, and you can see that Declan might have that possibility going forward.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think he's, like you said, a very honest player. I think it was another really good acquisition. And like I said earlier, I mean, our guys do their homework, and they know the players. They also seem to know when players are ready to pop, when they're ready to take that next step, and that's. Sometimes it seems like the guy has to be in the NHL before they can figure some of those out. Our guys, boy, they seem to get them whether they're playing over in Europe or they're playing in the American League, and I don't know what the secret sauce is on the pro staff, but we acquire these guys, and all of a sudden they just take that extra jump. So I think that'll happen in this case also.
I think you guys complement each other really well, the pro side and the amateur side, even though there's not, there's a little bit of overlap, but I do think that you have some really good talent on both sides. And the fact that, for the most part, I mean, you've brought in a lot of new amateur scouts, but you still do have a core of guys that have been there throughout most of your time here, and that's true on the pro side too. And I think that chemistry, we talked about this before,
yeah,
but that chemistry is important as well. And then, as always, we'll look down the depth chart a little bit to some of the more recent draft picks here, including especially the ones that look like they're about ready to turn pro this year. And there was a couple of guys that got a few late season games with Hershey that their seasons ended, and they were able to sign that pro deal and jump in. David Gucciardi, a 7th round pick from a few years back, Ryan Chesley, a few others. So yeah, let's talk about some of those. Gucciardi played his full 4 years, I believe, at Michigan State. Stepped in. I think he might have scored in his first game there in the American League. How do you see his development? It's obviously hard when you have so many players coming into the pro game, and once you know they're not all going to be able to play in Hershey, and they're not all going to be able to play large chunks or swaths of games. You're going to have some veteran players. You got to have those guys sprinkled into the mix as well. But how do you see Gucciardi going forward? How have you seen his development from the time you called his name on the draft floor?
Yeah, it's once again our U.S. scouts like AJ Taves and Jeremy Browning and Rich. They really liked him. guess the biggest thing probably is you have to be really patient when you take someone that late in the draft.
Yeah.
Obviously they're on a different path. That's why they were drafted later, and you be patient with it. And I think he got a lot stronger. Skating improved. I think working with the development team, his puck decisions, improved as he went along. But I think a lot of that is confidence, So if you're patient with somebody and you're working with them, they get that confidence, and I think that confidence allows them to take that, a bigger jump. And there were some games I saw last year. It might have been probably was the best defenseman at Michigan State, who was, had a tremendous season. It was one of the top programs in the country, and he ends up in Hershey. And as you said, he scored, I think, his first game. Talking to Patrick Weller and the coaches down there, they were really happy with him and that. But I think he's a real good example of be patient, just let him take his little steps and improve all the time, and work with him and working with Brooks Orpik too. That doesn't
absolutely
that doesn't hurt.
No, that's
he's such a professional and such a good person. I mean, it's just I think our young guys are really spoiled by that. Yeah.
I think I was spoiled by it too, because I think I learned a lot more from Brooks in the 4 or 5 years that I covered him than I did from a lot of players over the years. And again, with Gucciardi, I think it's just impressive that he gets to this point where he's able to sign a contract and turn pro. A lot of seventh rounders aren't able to push the envelope that far. So he's put himself in a position to have a pro career and maybe get to the NHL. And like you said, if that confidence keeps building, who knows where he can go with it. And then Ryan Chesley we talk about the 37th overall pick with Gastrine this year. Chesley was number 37 a few years back, and now turns pro. And you could see his progression with the Golden Gophers over the years that he spent there. And he seemed to be one of those rare kids, and maybe especially at that position, where his body was pretty much NHL, almost NHL ready the day you guys drafted him when he was 18. What have you seen from him in the way of not just physical, but the development on the ice?
Yeah, no, I think he's a tremendous skater, and he's always been a tremendous skater. He was always that defensive defenseman on the U.S. under-18 team, playing with Hudson's older brother. Mm-hmm. So he was always the stay-at-home guy. He was always a penalty killer. And yet, strangely enough, he scored more goals than anybody in the program as a 16 and 17-year-old. And then I think in college it was good for him because he started to get more responsibility with the puck and started to carry the puck more, shoot the puck more. Obviously had a leadership role there also. And according to the development guys and talking to them, and again with Patrick Weller, sounds like he really had a good transition when he came in. He might have scored his first game also.
Yep.
So I kept looking at the score sheets thinking, is this correct? These guys all come and play their first game and score goals, especially defensemen. Yeah. So no, I think the college was really good for him to get that confidence back with the puck. He could always skate, and he was always really strong. Yeah.
Well, wouldn't that be something if he elevates himself to the NHL and he winds up being Cole Hudson's
with another Hudson
defensive partner after apprenticing with Lane at the development program?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Andrew Crystal, I think, is one that our fans are going to be interested to hear about, because this guy obviously has nothing left to prove. You could probably said that last year at this time at the WHL level. He just goes out and leads them scoring, and like you said, the midseason trade. But this kid, we saw him here in training camp. I thought, came about that close to landing a spot, at least one of those 10-game looks on the opening night roster here in Washington. He made it really hard to send him back last training camp.
He did, and that was as he was just going to be a 19-year-old last year, and I think he worked hard off the ice during the summer. I don't know if the plan was to give him as many exhibition games as he did, but he kept playing well, so they kept giving him another game, and he kept producing, and then they gave him power play time too in the exhibition games, and I think he made it really hard on the coaches, like you said, to make that decision. Went back to Kelowna, who was going to rebuild for this Memorial Cup, so they traded him to Spokane. Probably was a a really good place that he got to go to. They were a bit of a younger team, so Andrew had to be a little more of a leader also. Got to play with a couple other players, really good quality players, and Spoke ended up losing the league championship. But watching him out there with a couple of his line mates, it was sort of like watching the Harlem Globetrotters. They had the puck the whole night, So, and as you said, I mean, he won the scoring title. His points per game were off the charts. So it ended up, maybe a little bit of a tougher start in Kelowna, but it ended up really well for him. Yeah, and it'll be fun to watch him at training camp.
Oh, I think so too, and it's going to be fun to watch him beyond training camp too. And man, there's going to be a lot of competition just with a lot of the guys that you've drafted in the last few years. Miroshnichenko, LaPierre, Crystal for a slot or two that may be a regular slot or two that may be available here in the lineup for someone to grab hold of in the season ahead. And then looking back, I'm not sure exactly. I don't have it in front of me, but I feel like Patrick Thomas was a fourth-round pick, maybe around 117 overall. And his Ontario Hockey League body of work has really elevated from year to year, and he had an excellent season last year. How have you seen his development, and what do you think of him going forward as he turns pro this season?
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously a different position than David, Gucciardi.
He's a center, right?
Yeah, but I see kind of the same path, like drafted him, probably a guy that needed to get a little bit stronger, which he has, and still an area to work on, but really saw a difference in the confidence level this year. Captain of the team, on a good team, and an older team, had a really good year and gets rewarded, and he's part of the system now, and we'll see how he does.
Cam Allen, I believe, might have been the same draft or within a year or two of Patrick Thomas, but a right-handed defenseman, fifth round, a guy who maybe was seen as falling a little bit, but has certainly seemed like he's picked up his game in the last year or so, and seems to be absolutely ready. And also a guy who physically looks like he was ready for that maybe last year when he was here.
Yeah, I think his draft year, he was captain of Canada's team in the Lincoln tournament. I think there's a lot of talk about him going into the year, because he had a really good year as a 16-year-old. And then I think as the year got going, he probably put a little too much pressure on himself, and I think he ended up falling to us, where we got him. And then when the London Knights are trying to trade for you, that's a really good sign. And they traded for him, and he ended up being part of a team that won a Memorial Cup. So I think that's going to London was very good for Cam. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you see him in the gym physically. I mean, this guy is he's a machine. He really is. And I know he works out, I think, at the same gym, too, that Tom Wilson does in the summertime. And Tom had even mentioned him during his draft year about just a casual conversation about, there's this young guy. I don't know how good he is, but he's in the OHL and, said his name. Yeah, we know him. And he just said, well, boy, he sure comes to the gym every day and puts an honest effort in.
Tom's got an eye, too, eh? Antoine Keller, goaltender that you guys, another penchant that you guys have is you see a guy who's lingering out there in the later round, you'll throw away not throw away, but you'll use a future pick to take him, as you did with Antoine Keller, who I think might have been in the Quebec League when you drafted him, or no, maybe he was in France when you drafted him.
Yeah, he
played
was
in the
France
Quebec League maybe last year.
The next year, yeah.
And so what's the immediate future going to be like for him, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, he was playing in the Swiss Junior League. He's French, though, and then we saw him play in the B Pool World Junior for France, and then got another pick in order to take him in the 7th round. And then he played a year in the Quebec League, went back this past year to play in Switzerland with the men, but sharing time, too, with one of the other goalies. So I think, we'll see how he's doing here, but it would be good to get him in back to North America and get him in the system and have our coaches work with him more.
Do you guys have a goaltending slot for him this year?
Yeah, it's like I said, we'll see how he does, but I think that I know Scott, I think, would like to have him, I think closer to, to us so that we can spend more time and working with them and getting Ole in there to watch him a lot, which he did last year too, but it's a lot easier, I think, if they're playing in North America, and also the ice size and the angles and everything else. So, yeah, we'll see how he does, but it'd be like to see him be playing here in North America.
And as we alluded to earlier, that the draft class of 2024 for you guys was really strong, and it was confirmed during the 2025 World Junior Championship. We had any number of guys who were dazzling for their various teams, and a couple of them getting booed by the Canadian crowds there for.
Yes, we're the villains.
Yeah,
and,
you drafted a handful
for probably different reasons. Obviously Ryan Leonard was got a lot of attention from the Canadian crowd and booing him, and probably because he was the best player in the tournament, and then we had Peter Sikora, who is he is a hard-working guy, and he is not afraid to go to the net, and the crowd seemed to take a liking to him, as they had 18,000 people booing him, and it was actually kind of funny too, because he's from the Czech Republic, and I don't think he would probably be used to that kind of a reaction. And I remember Brooks Orpik saw him the next day after one of the games, and said, they're kind of booing you out there. And he's like, yeah. And he's, what do you think of that? He goes, well, I kind of like it.
Yeah.
So that was I thought that was a great answer, and he was the villain. Yep.
Where do you think Sikora is going to play this year?
He'll probably be back in Trinitz. Trinitz has an excellent system there. I think they were in the league finals 6 years in a row, maybe won 5 times. General manager played there, was a highly respected Czech player, and I think that's probably where he will be, and it's a good situation for him.
And a couple of the other kids that played in the World Juniors who showed well, who could play here pro this year would be Leon Mugli, the second-round defenseman who was taken after Cole Hudson with the second of the 2 picks you had last year, and then Eric Smatejko, the third-round center.
Yeah, Eric's was he's a good example, again, of what we were talking about earlier. He played in St. John, who was probably the worst team in the Quebec League, who, one of the worst teams in all of major, junior hockey in the CHL. We thought we got really good value with him. I don't think he could have played better in the World Junior team. That Canadian game, I think he scored a couple goals against Canada. That's was quite a game there. He had leadership also. They had a younger team and pretty highly sought after. We started getting a lot of phone calls about him, and Alan Haworth and Ali Lawan, our Quebec scouts, said that he's probably going to get traded to a contending team, and he did. Rimouski was hosting the Cup, and that was the guy they targeted. So he had that experience of playing a lot of hockey this year and playing in another high-level competition in the Memorial Cup. So and he'd be a 20-year-old, so he'll turn pro. We'll see. We'll see where he's at 6 or 7 weeks from now, and come in and have a good camp and make things interesting for the coaches.
Yeah, what's the difference between a kid like him showing up for the second time this year? So obviously he gets drafted last year. He comes to development camp, comes to the main camp. This year he comes to development camp, comes to the main camp. At those various checkpoints, what are you guys, not just with Eric's, but what are you guys looking for as these little checkpoints, development camp, main camp? Because not everyone comes to the main camp. Obviously, the college kids don't.
Yeah, they can't. Yeah. Probably the biggest thing, your first camp, it doesn't last long. You're only in here for about 5 or 6 days, and everything is new. And, you got the coaches, and you're in NHL, development camp, and the trainers. And I think it's, before they know it, the week is over and they're gone. And then I think you come back this year and it's like, okay, I know what to expect. I know what this is all about. I'm a veteran of this camp, and then you're looking for them to show some leadership too and try to help the group that we just drafted, kind of help them along with it. But I just think it's that being familiar with the coaches, with the training staff, with the strength coaches, just the facility, the hotel, everything, I just think first camp, it's gone. All of a sudden it's gone. You're done. You're on a plane and you're going back to where you're from, before you know it. So I think they're probably more relaxed and more confident, and I think everything probably slows down for them in their second or third camp.
Last thing before we let you go is always the same thing. You're class of 2025 is behind you, and the class of 2026 is now the focus. And we obviously know that Gavin McKenna is supposed to be one of those generational talents that maybe the 2025 draft didn't have, but sounds like the entire crop next year is kind of promising. I know you always seem to think that the same number of players make it from every, and history shows that you're correct, because I mean the demand is always there, so the players have to come from somewhere. But how do you see next year's crop? And it's obviously still pretty early, just in comparison to most recent crops. And what's your summer look like after this week?
Well, after this week, I'll go home and lose a lot of golf balls because my golf game needs a lot of work. I would describe it as entertaining.
Well, you've earned a lot of time on the links, though.
I just lease the golf balls, I think. So we'll do that for about a couple weeks, and then we've got evaluation camp in Minneapolis. Not an evaluation camp, but an under-20 tryout, so there's some late birth dates. We've got the Halinka tryouts for Canada. They'll bring in their top 40 kids, and then we have the Halinka tournament over in Czech Republic and Slovakia. My wife will come with me to that one, and we fit in a little holiday in Spain after that. So we've done that for about 5 or 6 years, the same place. And I don't do a whole lot. I read some books down by the water and go for a walk and kind of recharge my battery. And then at the end of that, we have an under-20 tournament in Homotov, which is about an hour outside of Prague, which will give me a chance to see the good late birth dates on Sweden and Finland and Czech and Slovakia. So there's some time off, but there's also lots of evaluation camps and tournaments, and those are actually really important for me because they really help me set up the rest of the year. Like you're seeing, the top 40 Canadian kids, and then at the tournament you've got the top 20 kids from every team. I mean, I should say from every country. So, and you get the late birthday tournaments, so you've got those, and it kind of helps me start planning where I need to go in October, November, and then the only kind of team that really isn't there would be the U.S. under-18 team, the development team. They bring a different group of 20 to the Halinka tournament, so I try to hit them right away, especially they usually play college games really early in the season, so I'll go watch them 3 or 4 times and try to get that evaluation done early on them, because there's usually so many players get drafted off that team. You need to see them play quite a bit.
Well, your work is never done, but I'm glad you're able to find a little bit of downtime. And we absolutely always appreciate, it's got to be 25 plus years now, the breaking down the ins and outs of the draft a couple days after it ends, and we always appreciate you sharing your infinite wisdom with us here on Break the Ice. Myself and our crack producer, Zach Garrett. So thanks to Ross Mahoney, as always, here. One of our favorite parts of late June, early July annually is this breakdown of Ross of the draft pick. So thanks for hanging out with us, Ross.
Oh, yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.